Hello and welcome to my video where I'm going to show you how to knit a Christmas bauble. I'll be knitting this flat in DK weight yarn, and then later I'll be adding a snowflake design in duplicate stitch. If instead you want to knit this in chunky yarn, then I have a video showing you how to do that as well, and I'll leave a link to it in the description box. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is cast on 10 stitches. To do this, I used the long tail cast on technique, but you could use your favourite method. I'm using some green DK weight yarn and the recommended 4mm needles. For row 1, which represents the right side or the front of the knitting, you need to do a KFB increase on every stitch. KFB stands for knit into the front and the back, and to begin you need to do most of the steps of a knit stitch. Except at the end, you don't push the stitch off the needle. Instead, you take the right hand needle around to the back and go down through the back of the same stitch. Then do all of the usual steps of a knit stitch. And this time you do take the stitch off the needle. This turns one stitch into two, so it's a single increase. And you do this on every stitch. So do most of the steps of a knit stitch, but don't push the stitch off the needle. Instead, take the right hand needle around to the back, take it down through the back of the same stitch, and then do all of the steps of a knit stitch, including pushing the stitch off the needle. And that's another KFB completed. And you just repeat this all along the row. At the end of this row, you should have 20 stitches. For row 2, which represents the wrong side or the back of the knitting, you just need to do purl stitches. So make sure the working yarn is towards you and just do purl stitches all the way across. Then for the rest of the increase section, plus the plain stockinette stitch section in the middle, you're just doing the same techniques: knits, purls and KFBs. So instead of demonstrating all of the rows, I'm just going to put the pattern for them up on screen now. By the end of row 20, you should have 50 stitches on your needles. Then row 21 begins the decrease section, and we're going to start with 3 knit stitches. And then we're going to do a K2 tog decrease. K2 tog stands for knit 2 together, and that's exactly what you need to do. So take the right hand needle up through the next 2 stitches and do all of the steps of a knit stitch. And that's it, that's one K2 tog completed. We've turned 2 stitches into 1, so this is a single decrease. And you just repeat knit 3 and K2 tog over and over until the end of the row. So that's knit 3 stitches, and then knit 2 stitches together. Knit 3 and K2 tog, and so on. Then for row 22, you just do purl stitches. And the rest of the decrease section is just a repeat of the methods we've already done, so I'm just going to put the pattern up on screen. At the end of this section, you should only have 10 stitches left. Now you need to cut your yarn to leave you with a yarn tail that's around 50 to 60 centimetres. This yarn tail will need to be used to seam up the bauble. Feed this yarn tail into a yarn needle, and then feed the yarn needle through all of the remaining stitches. Make sure you go through the stitches in this direction. You'll then be able to make this side of the bauble nice and tight by pulling on the yarn and making a kind of drawstring. And now I'm going to use some white DK weight yarn to add a snowflake design using the duplicate stitch method. Here you can see a grid that I drew where I designed the snowflake. To design the snowflake, I first had to work out how much area of knitting I had to play with and count the stitches. I worked out I had about a 13 by 13 stitch area, and so I made the design 11 by 11 stitches. You want to add your design to the plain knitting, not on top of the increases or decreases. Cut a long length of your contrast yarn, about an arm span's worth, and then feed it into your yarn needle. You'll be able to see on the front of your knitting you've got a series of V shapes, and in order to cover a V shape, you need to come up through the base of that V. Make sure you leave a long enough yarn tail on the back. Then go under, horizontally, the V shape above. And finally go back down through the base of the V shape where you've already come up. And that's all there is to it. You now just use the same process to cover all the stitches you want. So come up through the base of the V shape, go under horizontally the V shape above, and then go back down through the base. Repeat this until you've completed the snowflake design. Note that you don't want to pull the contrast yarn tight, because then it will basically disappear into the knitting below. Take note of which way up your duplicate stitch is, because you want to end up with V shapes, not N shapes. And then you should have something a bit like this. I did make a bit of a mistake and had to slightly alter the design, and hopefully it's not too noticeable. And once you've done that, just weave in the yarn tails. Next, we need to use the long yarn tail to seam up the bauble using Mattress Stitch. So first, make sure the drawstring is pulled tight. Then go over to the opposite side to where the yarn comes out, and you need to pick up 2 strands, 1 stitch from the edge. So find the gap 1 stitch from the edge, go down through that gap, and pick up 2 strands. And then take the yarn tail through. And repeat, so go over to the opposite side, find the gap 1 stitch from the edge, go down into it, and pick up 2 strands. And just keep repeating this process. This is going to be easier on one side compared to the other, because on one edge you did knit stitches and on the other edge you did increases and decreases. But as long as you stick to the rule of picking 2 strands up 1 stitch from the edge every time, or close enough, you'll be fine. Every inch or so you need to pull on the working yarn parallel to the seam just to tighten up the stitches. Just make sure that afterwards you give the seam a bit of a stretch. Once you've done about half the seam, you then need to add the stuffing. I'm just using some polyester stuffing. Then carry on with the mattress stitch until you reach the end of the edges. Then you want to go around the top of the bauble with a running stitch. So just go in and out of the knitting all around the top opening. Once again, this will create a kind of drawstring. I wanted this end to be the base of the bauble, so I pulled the yarn tight, then I took the needle through to the other end, and I made a hanging loop. Then I go back down through the bauble to the other end, and I weave in that end. I then make a knot at the base of the loop. And that's it, that's the bauble completed. Feel free to embellish the bauble however you wish. For instance, you could sew on a ribbon loop like I'm doing here. You could embroider simple shapes. You could add sequins, you could add beads. There's all sorts you can do. I really hope you enjoyed this project and thank you very much for watching.